All right, let's just jump right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a genuinely fascinating piece of source text, the 10 Pillars of Aristotelian Virtue. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Ancient philosophy, probably super abstract, right? Actually, no. This text is a surprisingly concise, incredibly practical set of rules for everyday life. If you've ever felt totally overwhelmed by all the noise and decision-making we deal with today, the structured wisdom we're about to look at is exactly what you need to cut through it all. Right off the bat, the source throws this massive list at us. And, okay, here's a kind of funny detail. The text is famously known as Aristotle's 10 Principles, but if you actually count them out, it lists 11 distinct tenets. I guess when you're trying to capture the whole shebang of human virtue, 10 bullet points just doesn't quite cut it. But seriously, when you encounter all these commands, naming fears, controlling your temper, never lying, remembering your mortality, it's literally a lot to take in all at once. Reading it straight through feels almost overwhelming. So that brings us to the big question. How do we actually make sense of all these pillars today? Like, how do we take this incredibly dense list of philosophical commands and turn them into something we can practically digest, remember, and, actually use? Well, to do that effectively, we can't just read down the list haphazardly. We need a framework that maps to our actual lived experience. So our roadmap for today is what we're calling an inside-out arc. First, mastering the inner self. Second, navigating others and resources. And finally, the big picture perspective.
Let's start with phase 1, mastering the inner self, or those everyday internal battles.
The text kicks things off with probably the most paralyzing emotion we deal with, fear. But instead of just offering some empty cliche like, hey, don't be afraid, it gives us a really concrete, active two-step procedure. Step 1, name your fears. You have to articulate exactly what it is that's scaring you. By identifying it, by giving it a name, you kind of strip away its vague, shadowy power. And then, step 2, face them. Once the fear is defined, the text basically demands action. You can't fight a ghost in the dark, right? But you can absolutely fight something you've dragged out into the light. Now, what's super interesting here is how the text juxtaposes two other critical forms of internal control. On one hand, we've got know your temptations and control them. These are our silent desires, those quiet internal pulls that threaten to derail our discipline. But on the exact opposite end of the emotional spectrum, we have control temper. These are the explosive, outward emotional outbursts. The source text puts equal weight on mastering both the quiet whispers of temptation and the loud shouts of anger. They both require just an immense amount of self-regulation.
Which brings us to what might just be the ultimate internal conflict to conquer. Never lie, especially to yourself. It is so incredibly easy to fall into the trap of lying to ourselves, isn't it? We do it to avoid pain, or maybe to justify our bad habits, or just to stroke our own egos. But the text absolutely demands we ruthlessly move toward the truth. Because think about it, if you've mastered your fears, your temptations, and your temper, it means literally nothing if you're fundamentally deceiving yourself about who you are. Absolute internal honesty, that's the bedrock of this whole philosophy.
Moving on to our second section, navigating others and resources. Basically dealing with the external world. We hit the third principle listed in the original text, and it acts as this perfect bridge between that internal self-control we just talked about and external action. The pillar simply states, be judicious in using your resources. This is just brilliantly practical. It recognizes that virtue isn't just about having pure thoughts. It's about physics. It's about how you deploy your time, your energy, and your money. Being judicious means exercising good judgment. Because let's be real, you simply cannot be virtuous or helpful to anybody else if you foolishly depleted everything you have to give. And that points us directly to how we should interact with people once our resources are actually managed well. Notice the direct contrast the text makes here. It pairs the mandate to give more with expect less. So really adopting an abundance mindset. Now, contrast that directly with stop bickering and stop struggling for your fair share. The source is actively pushing us away from that zero-sum, super defensive way of living. When you stop fighting tooth and nail just to get what you think you're owed, you completely free up the mental space and resources to just give without expectation. It's a real game changer for how we handle relationships. Let's take a second and really let this next principle sink in. Forgive others for your peace of mind. Notice the specific phrasing there. It doesn't say forgive others because they deserve it or forgive others because it's the morally superior thing to do. No, the text explicitly ties the act of external forgiveness straight back to your own internal personal peace. Holding on to a grudge is literally letting someone else live rent-free in your head. So forgiveness in this framework is basically a self-preserving act. You're doing it to reclaim your own tranquility. And that brings us to our final section, the big picture perspective, where we zoom all the way out to the cosmos. The text shifts gears here to the soaring, direct command. Focus more on the transcendent and sublime. Think about our day-to-day routines. We are constantly looking down, right? Down at our phones, down at our laptops, down at whatever immediate problem is right in front of our noses. This pillar demands that we consciously look upward. The transcendent and the sublime refer to things that are so much greater than ourselves. Immense beauty, profound art, deep philosophical truths. When you engage with concepts that vast, it naturally shrinks our daily anxieties right down to their proper, manageable size. And that builds into a very practical focus, weighing two competing concepts, the majors versus the trivialities. The source literally instructs us to focus on the majors and deliberately, consciously disregard the trivialities. Just think about how much of your week gets eaten up by absolute trivialities. Office gossip, minor inconveniences, whatever the fleeting social media outrage of the day is. This pillar acts like a ruthless filter for your attention. It asks you to make the tough, conscious choice to invest your mental energy only in the things that truly matter on a grand scale. Finally, we arrive at the culmination of the entire text. Remember your mortality. Deliver this fact to your mind daily. It's the ultimate unifying consequence of human life, and really, the climactic point of this whole explainer. Why does the text end here? Well, because truly realizing that your time is fundamentally finite is the ultimate catalyst for literally everything else we've talked about today. It is exactly why you have to stop bickering. It's why you have to face your fears today, right now. It's why you must focus on the majors. The clock is ticking for all of us, and our time to actually exercise these virtues is incredibly limited. So, we've walked through this amazingly dense framework from the inside out, and I want to leave you with a provocative question for your own self-reflection as we wrap up. Which pillar are you ignoring the most right now? Are you lying to yourself? Are you struggling for your fair share instead of just giving more? Or have you maybe just forgotten to look up at the sublime? Think on that. Let these ancient principles audit your modern life, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.